David Storm. I'm a master locksmith with over 16 years of practical and technical experience. I've produced this video to facilitate a basic understanding of the anatomy, function, and manipulation of common locking systems. For the last 8 years, I have traveled the gun show and ham radio circuit, demonstrating and selling locksmithing tools. Through these shows, I've met many locksmiths and laymen alike. Sometimes a previous customer will approach me and say, "You know, could you show me your demo again, because I'm still having problems picking locks." Instead of doing my demo, however, I have them show me their technique. 9 times out of 10, their raking or lifter technique is perfect, but their tension wrench pressure is too great. At first, I had a hard time teaching the correct pressure in person, but then I had a wonderful idea. I now have the student apply the pressure as I pick the lock. Having felt the correct pressure for so long, I can now gauge the resistance on the pins and instruct the student to either lighten or increase their pressure. I feel tension wrench pressure is the single most important aspect of picking, second only to a good working knowledge of the lock in question. However, no video, book, or manual I have ever watched or read has ever listed the correct pressure needed. They either state that a nebulous light pressure is required or state an unbelievable amount. In a recent example, I watched an instructional lockpicking CD where tension wrench pressure was listed at a whopping 1 pound. That is 14 times higher than the maximum pressure I would ever recommend. Obviously, it would be difficult to impossible to pour all 20 years of my experience and knowledge into a video, but on the topics covered, I have tried to be as thorough and straightforward as possible. If you see me at a show or presentation, please approach me and say hello. Thanks for watching. For PickLocks.com, I'm David Storm. To pick any pin, wafer, or disc tumbler lock in a conventional manner, a tension wrench and some form of pick is needed. 2 forces must be present to pick these locks: a rotational torque on the plug to bind and catch the pins on the shear line, and an upward pressure on the pins to raise them to the shear line. To begin picking, insert the short end of the tension wrench into the bottom of the plug as shown. Apply light downward pressure with 1 finger. Using only 1 finger helps resist the urge to lift the tension wrench and reset the pins. Insert the pick, in this case a lifter pick, and raise the pins to the shear line. When all of the pins in the lock have reached the shear line, the plug will turn and the lock will open. Through our cutaway lock, the top springs and pins can be clearly seen, and as the plug is rotated, the bottom chambers and pins are revealed. Using a lifter pick, the pins are raised to the shear line. This is the action used in picking. The plug rotates and the pins drop, locking the plug in place. With the tension wrench and lifter pick inserted, we begin to lift each pin individually. Randomly, the top pins can be seen catching and hanging on the minute lip created by the tight turning force exerted on the plug by the tension wrench. When the last pin is lifted into place, the plug is free to turn, unlocking the lock. From the front view, we can see the rocking motion of the lifter pick as its tip lifts the pins one by one to the shear line. When using a lifter pick, one should exert no more than 1 ounce of pressure on the tension wrench. The long rake is used with fast, full strokes in and out, while adding a wrist motion similar to the gesture made with the forefinger for come here. The numerous small ridges on the pick cause a rapid vibration in the pins similar to that created by the electric pick. This vibration raises the pins to the shear line very quickly. The drawback to this pick, however, is if the back or last pin is shorter than the pins toward the front, the back pin will seldom lock on the shear line. This can be remedied by picking the front pins with a long rake and lifting the last pin with a lifter or DeForest pick. The amount of tension applied to the tension wrench for raking is considerably less than that used for lifter picking. In terms of weight, this equates to less than half of an ounce, or the amount of pressure required to depress a key on a computer's keyboard. The W rake is my favorite pick. I use this pick about 80% of the time. The main exception is locks with restrictive wards or tiny keyways. This rake has the exact same oscillating motion and tension wrench pressure as the long rake. The strong feature of this pick resides in the deep center groove, allowing for a higher vibrational peak, eliminating the need for a lifter pick when short back pins are encountered. Master-keyed locks differ from single-keyed locks in that master-keyed locks contain extra pins. This allows for a variety of selected keys with differing cuts to work in the same lock. The downside to master keying is an increase in the number of breakpoints available at the shear line. Since our master-keyed demo lock has an extra row of pins, the lock is much easier to pick than the previous single-keyed lock. Because the lock has no way of distinguishing between a master, submaster, or standard key and the lockpick, every possible combination is available to anyone manipulating the lock. As we can see in what follows, the lock seldom repeats its pattern in the picking process. Yet, no matter what combination is found, the pins still allow the plug to turn, thus opening the lock. Handcuffs are of the simplest design. They have only 3 moving parts: the shackle arm, locking cam, and double locking feature. If the double locking feature is in the open position, any straight, thin object can be inserted through the keyhole, catching the locking cam and driving it down. This frees the shackle arm and opens the cuff. The lifter pick, if available, is perfectly suited to picking handcuffs. The ease of picking handcuffs relies heavily on how the handcuffs are placed on the subject. The easiest is with the keyhole facing away from the body, as seen here. If the keyhole is facing the body, it is slightly more difficult, as the hands must now be rotated to gain access to the keyhole. This technique is impossible with hinged cuffs, in which case the pick would be placed in the mouth to gain access to the keyhole. This is difficult at best. The greatest scenario is when only one hand is shackled, as this allows for an immediate free hand. This is common when 2 individuals are shackled together, or an individual is shackled to an object. When the double locking feature is on, a bar on the bottom of the cuff slides sideways, preventing the locking cam from moving down. This inhibits standard picking, shimming, and further tightening of the shackle arm. To apply the double locking feature on most cuffs, a pin on the side of the lock is depressed, sliding the bar into place. To disengage the double locking feature, it is necessary to slide the locking bar away from the keyhole. This can be accomplished by using a lifter pick, bobby pin, or other suitable thin item. Once the locking bar has been slid out of the way, the cuff can then be picked in a standard fashion. When picking double-sided locks, such as this GM car door lock, it is necessary to pick both sides of the keyway. Rake one side, maintain light tension wrench pressure, remove the pick, turn it over, and rake the opposite side. Repeat the process until the lock opens. A popular car tool is a jiggler key. This example was improvised by cutting a key blank with only one forecut on both sides at the tip of the key. To use this jiggler, the key is inserted and a constant light torque is applied to the key. It is then wiggled in and out until the lock opens. The lock can also be relocked just as easily. The commercially available jiggler keys, seen here, are far superior due to their complex design and edge variety. These will open most double and single-sided car doors in seconds. The technique for the improvised and commercial jiggler remains the same. To use an electric pick on a double-sided lock, like this car club, insert a tension wrench in the center of the keyway. Insert the pick on either side and vibrate the pins. Insert the pick on the opposite side and repeat until the lock opens. The easiest way to open almost any club is with one of the commercially available jigglers, such as this ball key. To open this lock, simply insert the key, apply light rotational torque, and wiggle the pick in and out as shown on the previous car door. When the plug turns, the lock is open. To pick the club with standard picks, insert the tension wrench into the center of the keyway and apply light pressure. Next, insert a pick such as this small diamond on either side and rake 4 or 5 times. Insert the pick on the opposite side and do the same. Repeat the process until the lock opens. To prepare a blank for impressioning, clamp the head in vice grips and run a pippin file along the blade to erase any previous markings. Insert the blank into the lock, apply rotational torque and bind the pins. Wiggle the blank up and down. Lightly file the resulting marks like so. Repeat the binding and wiggling. The object to impressioning is to continue filing and marking until the marks cease and the lock opens. Because the pins are bound, only the pins not on the shear line create marks, which at first will be all of them. As the file cuts the blank deeper and deeper, some pins will reach the shear line, no longer bind, and no longer produce marks. When all of the pins reach the shear line, the lock will open and the key will be finished. The most reliable way to see the marks made is to put the blank between yourself and a light source. Never guess. If no marks are visible, simply repeat the binding and wiggling process until the marks are clear. it is important to be patient and resist the urge to cut corners. Impressioning can take upwards of 10 minutes, even when performed by experienced locksmiths. One must also watch out for stress fractures in the key blank near the head, as the blade often snaps off in the wiggling binding process. To avoid this, if stress fractures are seen, the current key cut must be copied onto a new blank to continue safely. Many times, this can also be avoided by simply using a high-quality name-brand blank instead of a low-quality generic blank. Also remember that files only cut in one direction, so for the return stroke, the file is lifted and brought back to prepare for the next cutting stroke. Hacksaw techniques are incorrect. If the key blank has difficulty entering or exiting the lock, it may be necessary to smooth the peaks of the cut by running the pippin file across them 2 or 3 times. Greater stability can be achieved by placing the file against the thumb, giving a more precise cut. Warded locks are the oldest locks still in use and are found in all parts of the world. Most of these locks have 3 wards. Passkeys or warded master keys are cut to bypass these wards. The broad tip of the key spreads the spring locking bar, which resembles a bobby pin. If the lock has 2 locking bars, a double-tipped key is required. The use of the key is simple. Just insert and turn. If the lock doesn't open, try a different key. .100% of all warded padlocks can be opened using only 5 passkeys, regardless of the make or model. Pin tumbler padlocks, such as this master, are picked in the same fashion as any other pin tumbler lock. Simply apply light pressure on the tension wrench and rake the pins, in this case with a small diamond pick. When the plug turns, rotate it fully and the shackle will pop open. With the Avis Buffalo high security disc lock, super light pressure is used to bypass the spool pins. Note that the tension wrench is twisted to allow for a feather-like touch. To begin, insert the tension wrench but do not apply pressure. Insert the pick and apply super light pressure. Rake the pick down and out as though trying to scrape layers from the pins. Continue raking while maintaining light pressure. If the plug turns slightly and locks in place, then the pressure is released and the process begins anew. Let's see that once more. Insert the tension wrench, but do not apply pressure. Insert the pick and apply super light pressure. Rake the pick down and out as though trying to scrape layers from the pins. Continue raking while maintaining light pressure, and the lock opens. American brand padlocks are so difficult to open, many locksmiths believe they are impossible. As you can see, however, they are quite pickable. In fact, this American brand military padlock was given to me at a gun show after a fellow vendor said, "I sell these as pick-proof, and if you can pick this, I'll give it to you." After I picked it and 3 others, he changed his sign from pick-proof to pick-resistant. American padlocks can be rather easy if you follow a few simple steps. First, use a very small tension wrench, such as this one made from a lady's bobby pin. Place it in the top of the keyway instead of the traditional bottom. Second, use super light pressure to bypass the scored security pins. Third, use a small pick to bypass the keyway wards. And finally, if the lock is free, keep it against your chest for greater precision and control. The exact same technique is used on this medium security rekeyable master brand padlock. Here, I'm using a standard size tension wrench and keeping it from popping out by applying support with my left index finger. A wonderful feature to rekeyable padlocks is that once picked, the core can be removed and the pins replaced with new ones to fit any key. Have you ever spent 5 minutes picking a lock only to find you were turning in the wrong direction? Well, if you have a plug spinner, not only will it be no problem, it may even be wise to purposely do so. To use the plug spinner, cock the tip in the direction the lock was picked, in this case, clockwise. Insert the tip and depress the back button. The plug will be spun in the opposite direction so fast that the pins don't have time to drop back into their chambers. This solves the problem in a quick and efficient manner. In many cases, a lock will pick towards the wrong or locking direction easier than towards the unlocking direction. In these cases, if a plug spinner is available, the locksmith can pick the lock quickly and easily in the locking direction and use the spinner to flip the plug back, thus opening the lock. Tubular locks are pin tumbler locks that have their pins arranged horizontally instead of vertically. To pick these locks, the pins are depressed not upwards, but inwards. Many commercially available picks exist, such as the one seen here. To use this pick, we begin by resetting the fingers. This entails loosening all 8 finger tension knobs and pressing downward on the fingers to align them with the pick body as seen. Now align the static tension finger with the lock's plug slot and insert the pick. Apply a light turning force to the pick and begin pushing the fingers in one by one in a round-robin fashion. This is akin to lifter picking, except instead of lifting the pins to the shear line, we are pushing them to the shear line. Stiff pins are depressed first, leaving spongy-feeling pins for last. Eventually, as more pins pick, they will all stiffen, reach the shear line, and open the lock. Once the lock is open, the tensioning knobs are immediately tightened. This locks the fingers in place, retaining the current pin depth. At this point, we have a temporary key until the fingers are reset. If only one tubular lock needs to be opened, it is quicker, easier, and cheaper to drill and replace it. However, if one owns 30 vending machines, then this method is far superior. To decode the fingers, measure the amount visible within the slots. Begin on the left end of the static tension finger and continue in a cyclic fashion until reaching the opposite end. Record the decoded numbers in order. These numbers can then be used to cut a key matching those depths. In a pinch, the pick itself can be used as a temporary key until a replacement is procured. These tubular picks by Southern Ordnance are without a doubt the best available, and will outperform many other tubular tools that cost twice as much or more. The picks ship with a cap for the tip, which is simply a rubber nipple available at any Lowe's or similar do-it-yourself store, and can therefore be easily replaced if lost. The steel washer is used to push all 7 or 8 fingers forward simultaneously and was the first thing I removed when I received the pick. It is not necessary and will interfere greatly with the technique shown. As you can see here, I have removed the washer on the 7-pin version to allow for easy access to the pick fingers. In this technique, the fingers are not pushed flush with the tip but pulled back to the base of the milled grooves in the front of the pick. Here we can see a close-up of the set screw that is loosened to remove the washer from the pick's body. Also note the excellent craftsmanship and attention to detail in the milling and placement of the pick fingers in stainless steel core. The knurled locking knob locks all 7 fingers in place simultaneously, unlike the previous pick, which was independent and time-consuming. To begin picking, loosen the knurled locking knob surrounding the pick's core. Now carefully pull each finger back to the base of the milled grooves. Insert the pick, making sure to align the static tension finger with the lock's plug slot and rotate gently to seat the pick against the back of the lock. While applying a light turning force to the pick handle, begin pushing the fingers of the pick in one at a time in a round-robin fashion. Switch hands, being careful not to release pressure on the pick. Transfer the pressure smoothly between hands and continue picking. When the lock picks, tighten the knurled lock knob. You now have a temporary key until the fingers are reset. The final score for this pick is a 10. I like the action, the slip-resistant handle, and the knurled locking knob. This is the best tubular pick I have used in years. The tubular pick in the previous demonstration cost around $800, and this pick outperforms it in speed and value. The price of this pick? Only $80, or $150 for both the 7 and 8 pin. I highly recommend this pick. This Jennings trigger lock is another example of a tubular style lock. To open this type, wedge an ordinary tension wrench into the center star. Apply light pressure and begin depressing the pins one by one in any order. This can be accomplished using a straight pin, hat pin, toothpick, feeler pick, bobby pin, or any other straight, thin item. When the tension wrench turns, the lock is open. Starting from left to right are 3 examples of pick-resistant pins: the spool pin, the floating core pins, and the mushroom pin. These pins foil the picking process by wedging sideways in the lock before reaching the shear line. Here we can see the pins in the 2nd and 4th chambers are spool pins. During the lifter picking session, the 3 standard top pins will reach the shear line and pick. This, however, allows the plug to rotate the shear line into the cavity of the 2 spool pins, locking them in place and impeding any further picking. However, if rake picking is combined with super light tension wrench pressure, the spool pins will usually vibrate into place, allowing the lock to open. Therefore, lifter picking is not the most efficient means for bypassing spool pins and should be avoided if spool pins are detected. The most effective technique with standard tools entails lifting all pins above the shear line simultaneously, applying super light pressure, and then lowering the pins back to the shear line with a rake picking motion. In this way, the top pins never come in contact with the shear line, making it impossible for the spool pins to bind. To detect the presence of spool or mushroom pins, watch for a slight plug movement followed by a binding or locking of the pins. This seizure can be easily felt in the pick and sometimes prevents the pick from moving until pressure on the tension wrench is released. The plug movement is similar to the release felt when the lock picks normally. The lock will not open, however, and the tension wrench will often need to be lifted in the opposite direction to fully reset the pins in order to continue picking. Electric picks produce a vigorous vibrating action which transmits through the bottom pins, causing the top pins to fly upwards, creating a separation or gap at the shear line. As seen here, a slight rocking motion can be used to facilitate the picking process. Electric picks can often open even high-security locks with mushroom and spool pins in seconds. The technique is basically the same as that used with standard picks. The tension wrench is inserted into the bottom of the plug's keyway and light to super light pressure is applied. The vibrating needle is then inserted into the keyway and activated. A slight tilting motion is then used to ensure the needle contacts each pin. Within seconds, most residential grade locks will open. The degree of vibration can be controlled by adjusting the set screw on the bottom of the pick body. Tightening the screw reduces the torque, while loosening the screw increases it. Commercially available electric picks usually come standard with an Allen wrench, standard tension wrench, 3 or 4 pick needles, and a feather touch tension wrench. For this project, you will need a pick needle, a pair of electric scissors, a knife, needle nose pliers, and a screwdriver. Using the knife, notch the base of the static, non-moving jaw. Grip the base of the static jaw and lever upwards. The notch will allow it to tear cleanly from the body. Now remove the screw and blade from the remaining jaw. Save the screw and discard the blade. Using the pliers, snap off the tip. Insert the pick needle and replace the screw to lock it in place. The result is an inexpensive, improvised electric pick that will open most residential-grade pin tumbler locks. In lockout situations, it is sometimes easier to pick a side door or back door instead of the front door. Often, however, these doors are not only locked but also chained. To bypass a security chain, insert a thumbtack in the door just above the chain slide, or for metal doors, use a neodymium magnet. With the anchor firmly in place, stretch a rubber band between the chain's head and the anchor. When the door is shut, the chain's head will be drawn down the slide to the opening slot. If the door is shaken at this point, the chain will fall out through the slot, freeing the door. For hotel security latches, this piece of A-shaped, heavy-gauged wire works wonders. Open the door as far as the latch will permit, and insert the tool through the crack provided. Rotate the tip towards the door past the latch. Close the door, and simultaneously rotate the tip away from the door, flipping the latch and opening the door. To relock the door, simply reverse the procedure. Push-button combination locks are popular in commercial applications where a high employee turnover is common, including FedEx mailboxes, hotel management doors, fast food restaurants, and realty key boxes. Many forms of these locks exist, and in some, a fatal flaw in their security allows one to apply pressure to the release lever at the top of the lock, and by lightly tapping the buttons, discern which ones need to be depressed in order to open the lock. The effect is simple. The buttons that are springy are ignored, and the buttons that are tight, hard, or bound are depressed. When a button is found, release pressure on the central release lever. Depress the discovered button, reapply pressure to the lever, and continue until the full combination is set. Number 1 is hard. 2, 3, and 4 are spongy. 5 is hard. 6 is spongy. 7 is hard. 8 is spongy. 9 is hard. And the lock is open. If you're curious as to what a key and knob lock, a pair of pliers, and an auto body dent puller have in common, I'll show you. This technique, while not very pretty, yields extremely fast results. In an emergency lockout situation, it is necessary to open the lock quickly and reliably. To do so with these tools, begin by screwing the tip of the dent puller into the keyway of the lock. Note, this will destroy the lock. Make sure the tip is screwed tightly into the plug. If so, use the slammer weight to wrench the lock from the lock body. Now, using the pliers, grip the spindle inside the knob body and turn to unlock the lock. To drill a lock, start by drilling an 1/8" pilot hole just above the plug's keyway. Commercially available templates do exist to overlay on the lock if a more precise location for the hole is needed. Once the lock is drilled, use a flat blade screwdriver or key blank to turn the plug and open the lock. Padlock shims are thin, curved pieces of metal capable of sliding down the shackle into the lock, separating the shackle latch and the spring-loaded bolt, thus opening the lock. The ears on the shim allow for easy rotation, as the shim must be inserted down the outside portion of the shackle and forcefully twisted to face the inside body of the lock. If the padlock has dual latching bolts, like this master, then an additional shim is added on the opposite side. At this point, the lock will often pop open on its own. If not, tug lightly on the shackle. If the lock still fails to open, readjust the shim and repeat the tugging. Padlock shims are an infallible way to open spring-loaded latching padlocks. They will not, however, open ball-bearing padlocks such as American and multi-lock. Master combination padlocks, despite their inexpensive construction, are nearly impossible to manipulate. Unlike the see-through combination lock, master locks employ false gates on their wheel packs, preventing the manipulator from effectively feeling the correct entry point. In this see-through lock, and in many generic combination padlocks, the three wheels contain only one entry point, making it easy to feel the spaces as the knob is turned. Although difficult to manipulate, most master combination padlocks are susceptible to shimming. Following the previous instructions, insert the shim, twist into place, and tug the shackle to open the lock. To my knowledge, Master has never made a combination lock with dual latching spring bolts, so only one shim will ever be needed for this type of padlock. Master does, however, make a high-security combination padlock which utilizes a ball-bearing latching system, thereby defeating the use of padlock shims. Master 175 padlocks employ 4 wheels and a central pivoting cam. On one end of this cam, 3 fingers rest on the spindle connecting the 4 wheels, and on the other, a single finger keeps the shackle from opening. If the correct combination is entered, the 3 fingers drop into depressions on the spindle, consequently causing the opposite single finger to pivot upward. When this finger rises, the shackle is free to open. The old way to bypass the 175 uses a piece of shim stock cut to resemble a knife. Insert the shim along the right side of the 3rd wheel and angle down. While the shackle is depressed and held to release pressure on the pivoting cam, grip the shim firmly and pull down. Release the shackle and the lock opens. This works because the shim forces the pivoting cam upwards, lifting the single finger and freeing the shackle. The new way uses a common lifter pick. To begin, depress and hold the shackle. Now insert the pick along the top of any wheel. Pivot the handle sideways. This will cause the tip to hook one of the 3 cam fingers, driving it down, causing the opposing single finger to rise. Release the shackle and the lock opens. Often the pick will follow the track so well only the forefinger is needed to pivot the pick and open the lock. In this close-up, we can see the curve of the pick must always face to the right, and the handle is always pivoted to the left. Once again, depress and hold the shackle. Insert the pick along the top of the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd wheel. Pivot the pick left and release the shackle. Within seconds, this filing cabinet lock can be opened using standard picking methods. The tension wrench is inserted in the bottom of the keyway and light pressure is applied. Now the pick is inserted, and using a long come-here motion, the pins are raked from back to front. Note that as the plug turns, the brass locking cam at the top of the lock is drawn downward, releasing the body of the lock. This brass cam is only here to show the mechanics of the lock. On an actual cabinet, the lock face would be flush with the cabinet body. To bypass this lock, a straight pick is used to reach in, drive the brass cam down, and open the lock. Here, a diamond pick is used to reach the back of the lock. It levers against the top, driving the cam down and releasing the lock's body. The same technique is applied to generic single-bolt padlocks. A modified diamond pick, shown here, is shoved into the back bolt, and the bolt is levered away from the shackle and into the center of the lock. This frees the shackle and opens the lock. Gun locks, like padlocks, are essentially pin tumbler cores in a portable housing, so it should come as no surprise that they can be picked using standard techniques. As a side note, to show the durability of the Southord stainless steel picks, I've put a 90-degree bend in the center. This would most certainly snap the old clock spring steel tools. Here, however, we simply bend the pick out and immediately use it to continue picking. This is an extreme demonstration to show that under normal wear and tear, a Southord pick can last a lifetime, or in the worst case scenario, many years. Picking up where we left off, we insert the tension wrench, apply pressure with the forefinger, rake the pins, and open the lock. Snap picks, or pick guns as they are often called, transmit their snapping energy through the bottom pins, causing the top pins to fly upward. This creates a gap at the shear line. A light tapping is used on the tension wrench instead of the usual constant pressure. This, combined with the flicking motion of the pick needle, will open most locks, including those deemed high security. In this portion of the video, we'll explore some unorthodox ideas like this one, using an auto jiggler to open a key and knob lock. The only prerequisite is that the jiggler fit into the keyway. If so, a standard jiggler technique is used. Apply and maintain turning force and jiggle the key in and out without coming completely out of the keyway. The same procedure can be used with a key that has deep cuts in the center. It isn't foolproof, but in a pinch, it's worth a try. And this is a quick-set key and knob style lock. Begin by removing the spindle. Insert the quick-set core tool into the slot previously occupied by the spindle. Tap the tool sharply with a mallet. This will dislodge the lock from the knob body. The concave tip contracts the spring steel retainer clips, exerting outward pressure, forcing the lock from the knob. Obviously, if one does not have access to the required quick-set core tool, any similar piece of metal with a concave tip can be used. Once the lock is removed, the next step is to remove the C retainer clip located on the plug at the rear of the lock. To remove the clip, insert a small flat blade screwdriver under the uppermost region and with a wiggling motion, loosen and free the clip. With the clip removed, we now have unrestricted access to the shear line, allowing us to insert our curved lock shim into the back of the lock along the top of the plug. Holding the lock as shown, apply light pressure to the shim. This will exert pressure on the last pin in the lock. Our goal is to raise this pin to the shear line, allowing the shim to slide between the top and bottom pin. This is accomplished by sliding our key blank into the lock, thereby raising all pins above the shear line. As the key is removed, the pins slide down the ramp on the front of the key. The shim catches the rear top pin at the shear line and keeps it trapped in the uppermost chamber. The process is then repeated for the remaining pins. When all 5 pins are trapped in their upper chambers, the plug will be free to turn. Keeping the plug in a rotated 45-degree angle, remove the shim and insert the plug follower into the back of the lock. This will drive the plug forward while keeping the top pins in the upper chambers. Using a tension wrench or key blank tip, rotate the plug until the top pins drop into their plug chambers, locking the lock. The jackknife and featherweight jackknife are two wonderful pick sets designed and manufactured by Southern Ordnance. To open the pick, grip the center of the tension tool and pull up with one hand while pushing it out with the other. Loosen the knurled screw on the bottom of the pick. And lay it out flat. Tighten the knurled screw to lock the chosen pick in place. When finished, loosen the screw and replace the pick. Retighten the screw, locking all the picks in place. Insert the tension wrench into the hole in the back of the jackknife body and push down on the center of the tension tool while pressing in with the opposing hand. Snap the end in place, and the jackknife stores easily in a pocket or on a keychain until needed. For many years, the Schlag Wafer disc lock was thought to be unpickable, and although it is difficult to pick using conventional pin tumbler tools, if one has a Schlag Wafer disc pick seen here, it can be opened quickly and efficiently. The technique entails inserting one of the 4 keys provided into the lock and sliding the wire tool above the key as far in as is permitted. Now a light pressure is applied to the remaining half key, as one would apply pressure to a tension wrench. Remove the wire tool and release pressure gradually on the key until a single click is heard or felt. Once the click is heard or felt, the lock is picked and a greater pressure may be applied to turn the plug and open the lock. If multiple clicks are heard, or if the lock refuses to open, simply repeat the process until the lock opens.
Now here's a unique situation. I had this happen one time to a gentleman's safe when he was transporting the safe. It was in the back of the truck. The pins vibrated and the core turned. So now we have a problem because we have this piece right here on this key that will not allow, it's supposed to go into one of these 3 areas on the lock, but it can't now because the post is centered between one of these 2 inlets and it's stuck. It's locked down in one of these positions. So now the key will not go in because of this little nub that's sticking out on the key. So the way around that, it seems very obvious, but it may not be to some people, is to file this nub off. It's not important in the actual working of the lock. So what I've done here is filed off this nub. So now there is no nub sticking up from there, as you can see. I insert it in the lock. It goes in now because there's no reason it shouldn't. And I turn the lock to a locked position, at which point the regular key that has the little nub on the top can now be inserted and it's restored to working condition.